In the middle of a diner, an arrogant bully slapped an elderly black veteran in front of everyone. But he had no idea that the man's son was the head of U.S. Homeland Security. What happened next left everyone in shock. Let's continue this story. The diner smelled of sizzling bacon and fresh coffee that morning, the kind of scent that usually brought comfort and quiet conversations. But what happened inside that little diner would become a story people would never forget. It all started with the creak of the glass door as an old man walked in. His back was slightly bent, his steps slow but steady, and his uniform jacket, though worn and faded, still carried the proud patches of service. He was a black veteran, someone who had fought battles long before most people in the diner had even been born. His silver hair caught the light as he adjusted his cap and gave a polite nod to the waitress, who instantly smiled because she knew him well. Everyone around here knew him. His name was James Carter, a man of honor, a man who had survived wars abroad only to live quietly in his small hometown. But not everyone in the diner carried respect in their hearts that morning. Sitting in a booth by the window was a man whose loud voice had already irritated most of the customers. He was young, brash, with a cruel smirk plastered across his face. He had been complaining to the waitress, snapping his fingers, demanding more syrup for his pancakes as though the entire diner existed only to serve him. People avoided his gaze, but the tension around his presence was undeniable. His name wasn't known to many, but what mattered was that his arrogance filled the air like a bad smell. James walked past him quietly, settling at his usual spot at the counter. The waitress poured him his coffee, and he thanked her softly, his voice calm and warm. For a moment, things seemed peaceful, until the bully noticed him. "Look at this old man." The bully sneered loud enough for others to hear. "Still pretending to be somebody important with those old army patches. Newsflash, Grandpa, nobody cares about your little war stories." The diner went silent. Forks stopped clinking against plates. All eyes darted between the old veteran and the loud-mouthed bully. James, as if used to such remarks, simply lifted his coffee to his lips and took a quiet sip. He had faced bullets and bombs in his life. Words from a stranger could not shatter his dignity. But the bully wasn't finished. He stood up, swaggering over to James, his boots thumping against the tile floor. "What are you even doing here? Shouldn't you be in some nursing home drooling over pudding cups? You think anybody respects you? You're nothing but a washed-up has-been." James didn't reply. He simply looked at the man, his steady eyes holding a quiet strength. That silence made the bully angrier. He leaned closer, inches from James's face. And then, with one swift motion, the bully slapped him across the cheek. The sound echoed through the diner like a gunshot. Plates rattled on tables. The waitress gasped, dropping her notepad. A child sitting in the corner booth clutched his mother's hand tightly, frightened. No one could believe what had just happened. The old veteran didn't move. He simply placed his cup down, straightened his jacket, and looked at the bully with eyes that had seen real war. He didn't raise his hand. He didn't strike back. He didn't need to. His silence, his calmness, it spoke louder than anything else in that diner. But before the bully could mock him again, a man sitting in the back corner stood up. He had been there quietly the whole time, watching the scene unfold. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a neat suit, his presence suddenly shifted the atmosphere. His voice carried authority, deep and commanding. "That's enough." The bully turned, scoffing. "And who are you supposed to be? His babysitter?" The man stepped forward, his gaze locked on the bully. "That's my father you just laid hands on." The diner froze. Whispers rippled through the room. The bully blinked, caught off guard, but quickly tried to laugh it off. "Oh really? And what are you going to do about it?" The man pulled out a leather wallet, flipping it open just enough for the badge inside to glint under the fluorescent lights. The golden emblem was unmistakable. Homeland Security. "I'm not just his son," he said firmly. "I'm the head of Homeland Security. And you, sir, just made the biggest mistake of your life." The bully's smirk vanished. His face drained of color. He stumbled back a step, suddenly aware of the weight of his actions. The other diners looked on in awe, some with widened eyes, others nodding with satisfaction. Justice, it seemed, was about to walk through the door. The waitress rushed to James, her hands trembling. "Are you okay, Mr. Carter?" she whispered. He gave her a gentle nod, brushing it off as though the slap had been nothing compared to what he had endured in life. But his son wasn't about to brush anything off. His jaw tightened, his voice like steel. "You assaulted a veteran in public," he said to the bully. "You disrespected a man who sacrificed for this country. And you did it in front of witnesses." He gestured to the people watching. Every single one of them saw it. The bully opened his mouth to argue, but no words came. The man in the suit pulled out his phone, his fingers tapping swiftly. Within moments, he was making a call, his words precise and sharp. "Yes, this is Director Carter. I need an immediate response team dispatched to Carter's diner. Civil assault, public disturbance. Suspect is male, mid-30s. Standing in front of me now." Everyone in the diner was stunned. The quiet old man at the counter, the humble veteran, was the father of one of the most powerful men in the country. And the arrogant bully had just picked the wrong man to mess with. The diner buzzed with whispers, and the bully's face twisted into panic. He tried to step back, but two men who had been sitting at a table near the door, customers who clearly weren't just ordinary patrons, stood up, blocking his path. They flashed their credentials as well. Federal agents. The bully's escape routes were gone. The old veteran finally spoke, his voice calm, but carrying the weight of years. "Son, don't make a scene for me. I've fought my battles." Let him face his. But it was too late. The wheels of justice were already turning. The diner door jingled open again, but this time it wasn't another customer. Within minutes of the call, two uniformed officers from the local precinct arrived, their radios crackling. They stepped inside, scanning the room, and immediately recognized the man in the suit. Respect flashed across their faces as one of them said, "Director Carter." The bully's eyes darted from the officers to the tall man standing beside the old veteran. He tried to stammer out an explanation, his voice cracking. It was just a misunderstanding. I didn't mean anything by it." The old man was. Enough. Director Carter cut in, his voice calm, but cutting like a blade. "Every person in this diner saw what you did. You didn't just disrespect my father. You disrespected every veteran who put on that uniform. You think that patch on his jacket is just some decoration? That patch represents sacrifice, blood, and lives lost. And you had the audacity to lay hands on him." The officers stepped forward, but before they could even touch the bully, he raised his hands defensively. His cocky smirk was gone, replaced with the look of a cornered man. Wait, come on. You can't arrest me for just one little slap. It's not that serious." The waitress finally found her voice, her cheeks flushed with anger. "Not that serious? He's nearly 80 years old. You hit him like he was nothing. We all saw it. You humiliated him in front of everyone. That's not little, that's disgusting." Other customers spoke up as well, their voices echoing around the diner. "We saw it too. He didn't do a thing to deserve it. This man's been eating here every Sunday for years, and we all respect him." The flood of testimonies drowned out the bully's weak protests. The officers exchanged a glance and nodded. "Sir, we'll take it from here." One of them reached for the bully's wrists. The man panicked, pulling back. "Wait, you don't know who I am. I've got friends, big connections. You'll regret this." Director Carter stepped closer, his tall frame casting a shadow over him. His voice dropped lower, colder. "Connections? Bigger than mine. You're talking to the man who oversees Homeland Security for the United States of America. There isn't a door you can hide behind. There isn't a friend powerful enough to erase what you just did. The only thing you're going to regret is walking into this diner today." The bully's bravado collapsed. His knees buckled slightly, and for the first time that morning, the arrogance drained completely from his face. The officers secured his wrists with a pair of handcuffs, the metallic click loud and final. Gasps of relief filled the diner as people realized justice was being served right before their eyes. James Carter, the old veteran, lifted a hand gently. "Son," he said softly, addressing his boy, "don't make too much fuss. I'm fine. I don't want to see you use your position for me." The director turned to him, his stern expression melting into something softer, respectful. "Dad, this isn't about me using my power. This is about right and wrong. You've given too much to this country to be treated like trash by some punk who doesn't know the first thing about sacrifice." The veteran lowered his eyes to the coffee cup sitting in front of him. It had gone cold. Slowly, he lifted it again, his hands steady despite his age, and took another sip. "You know, I faced worse than this. I didn't flinch when bombs went off in the middle of the night. I didn't flinch when I lost brothers in arms standing right beside me. But I'll tell you, son, He set the cup down and looked at the bully, whose face was pale with fear. It still hurts to know that the freedom we fought for lets men like this walk around, not valuing what was given to them. The entire diner fell into silence. Some people lowered their heads, others nodded slowly, tears brimming in their eyes. The weight of the veteran's words sank deep into everyone's hearts. The bully tried one last time to defend himself, his voice shaking. I didn't know. I didn't know he was your father." Director Carter's jaw clenched. He stepped closer, staring the man down. "That's where you're wrong. You should have respected him, not because he's my father, but because he's a man who served. You should have respected him simply because it's the right thing to do. That's what you failed to understand." The officers began escorting the bully toward the door. He stumbled, his pride broken, his wrists bound tight. But before they pushed him outside, James Carter spoke again, his voice firm. "Young man." The bully turned, his eyes wide. "I forgive you," the veteran said. His tone was calm, steady, and filled with a grace that stunned everyone. "Not for your sake, but for mine. Hate is heavy, and I've carried enough weight in my life. But make no mistake, what you did today will follow you. Not because of my son, not because of the law, but because deep down, you'll always know you struck a man who never struck back." The bully's lips trembled, but no words came out. He was led outside into the flashing lights of a police cruiser waiting by the curb. Inside, the diner slowly returned to life. People began whispering, then clapping softly. Some even stood and applauded James Carter, not because of the badge his son carried, but because of the strength and dignity he had shown in the face of humiliation. Director Carter sat beside his father at the counter, placing a steady hand on his shoulder. "Dad, you're stronger than anyone I know." James chuckled lightly, his eyes twinkling. "Stronger? No, just older. And when you get to my age, you learn that strength isn't about how hard you hit back. It's about how steady you stay when the world pushes you." His son nodded slowly, letting the words sink in. Around them, the diner hummed with quiet conversations, but the air felt different now. Thicker, heavier, charged with respect. Everyone knew they had just witnessed something bigger than a slap, bigger than an arrest. They had seen the power of dignity in the face of cruelty, and the strength of a family bound not just by blood, but by honor. And yet, this was only the beginning. The diner felt strangely quiet after the police car pulled away, carrying the bully into the distance. For a moment, it was as though everyone was still catching their breath. The tension that had hung in the air was gone, replaced with a heavy sense of relief. People were murmuring softly, some shaking their heads at what they had just witnessed, others whispering about how incredible it was to see justice served so swiftly. James Carter remained seated at the counter, his hands folded around the now empty coffee cup. His son sat beside him, scanning the room with sharp eyes, as though still ensuring there was no further threat. The waitress, still visibly shaken, approached cautiously. "Mr. Carter, are you sure you're all right? Do you need me to call the hospital?" The old man smiled gently, shaking his head. "I've been through worse, sweetheart. A slap won't break me. Save your worry for those who need it more." Her eyes watered as she nodded, then turned to his son. "And you? You came in here like an angel sent from above. None of us even knew he was your father." Director Carter gave a small, modest smile. "That's how Dad likes it. He doesn't want attention, doesn't want praise. He just wants his coffee and his peace." The waitress laughed softly, though her voice cracked with emotion. Around the diner, people began approaching the veteran one by one, offering words of gratitude, shaking his hand, thanking him for his service. Each person seemed to feel compelled to show respect, as though they needed to undo the cruelty they had just witnessed. An older man with a cane stepped forward. His voice trembled. "I served too, back in Vietnam. You carried yourself the way only a real soldier can. You didn't let anger control you. That's harder than people think." James nodded, giving his fellow veteran a firm handshake. "We all carry scars, brother. Some seen, most unseen." As the small crowd around him grew, Director Carter remained at his father's side, watching closely. He was proud, more proud than words could capture, but he also felt a heaviness settling in his chest. He had spent his entire career protecting his country from threats, both foreign and domestic. Yet seeing his father, a man who had already sacrificed so much, disrespected in such a blatant way stirred something deep inside him. He leaned closer to his father. "Dad, this can't keep happening. Veterans deserve better than this. You shouldn't have to endure insults in your own hometown." James chuckled quietly, sipping the fresh coffee the waitress had poured him. "Son, people like that bully exist everywhere. You can't legislate respect. You can't force a man to value what he doesn't understand. But you can stand firm, and you can live in a way that makes others question their own hearts." His son frowned, shaking his head slightly. "You always find wisdom in the ugliest moments." "That's called survival," James replied with a wink. Just then, the door opened again, and a gust of autumn air blew through the diner. Everyone turned to see a woman walk in, tall, well-dressed, with a sharp, polished air about her. She carried herself like someone used to authority. She looked around the diner, her eyes settling on James Carter and his son. "Director Carter?" she asked, her voice smooth but formal. He stood, recognizing her instantly. "Deputy Secretary Miles. What brings you here?" She approached briskly, lowering her voice once she reached them. "We received word of the incident. You know how fast news travels when it involves you. There are already cameras gathering outside." The diner buzzed at her words. Cameras? Reporters? Suddenly, the small-town eatery was no longer just a quiet place for coffee and pancakes. It was about to become the center of a national story. James sighed heavily. "I don't want a circus. This was a private matter. I don't need my name splashed across headlines." But his son shook his head. "Dad, this isn't just about you anymore. That man's actions symbolize something larger. Too many veterans get treated this way. Too many go unnoticed, disrespected. Maybe this is the time to shine a light on it." The deputy secretary nodded. "He's right. Public awareness can change minds, change hearts. You have a chance to show the world what dignity looks like, even in the face of cruelty." James hesitated. He had never been a man who sought recognition. In his mind, his service had been a duty, not a ticket for praise. But looking around the diner, at the waitress still trembling, at the young boy staring at him with wide, admiring eyes, at the fellow veteran clutching his cane, he realized this moment wasn't about him. It was about every soldier who had ever come home to a world that didn't fully understand their sacrifice. Finally, he nodded slowly. "All right, but if I speak, I won't speak for me. I'll speak for all of them, the ones who never got to sit at this counter again." His son placed a hand on his shoulder, pride swelling in his chest. "That's exactly why your voice matters." Outside, the faint sound of reporters shouting questions drifted into the diner. Camera flashes lit up the windows. Some customers peeked out curiously, whispering about how quickly the news had spread. James Carter adjusted his jacket, straightening the faded patches on his shoulder. He stood tall, despite his age, and walked toward the door with his son at his side. The crowd inside followed, drawn by the sense that history, in some small way, was unfolding right before their eyes. When he stepped outside, the cameras immediately clicked, the microphones thrust forward. Reporters shouted over one another. "Mr. Carter, how do you feel about what happened inside?" "Director Carter, will charges be pressed?" "What message do you have for Americans watching this right now?" The old veteran lifted a hand, signaling for silence. The crowd hushed. He looked directly into the cameras, his voice steady, clear, and strong. "I'm not here to talk about anger or revenge," he began. "I'm here to talk about respect. Not for me, but for every man and woman who ever put on this uniform. Today, one person forgot that respect. But tomorrow, we can all remember. Not because of force, not because of law, but because it's the right thing to do." The crowd listened in rapt silence. The cameras kept flashing, but James's words carried more weight than any photograph could capture. "I forgive the man who struck me," he continued. "But forgiveness does not erase responsibility. He will answer for his actions, just as we, as a country, must answer for how we treat those who served." When he finished, the crowd erupted in applause. Not the kind of applause meant for celebrities or politicians, but the kind born of genuine admiration and respect. James Carter had not only reclaimed his dignity that day, he had given a voice to countless others who had been silent too long. The applause outside the diner echoed down the street, drawing more and more people to the scene. Cars slowed, pedestrians stopped, and soon a small crowd had gathered, watching the elderly veteran who had suddenly become the center of attention. James Carter stood tall, the morning sun catching the lines on his weathered face. each one telling a story of battles fought and sacrifices made. His son remained close by, a silent pillar of strength. Director Carter wasn't used to standing in the background. His life was spent commanding rooms filled with generals, politicians, and world leaders. Yet in this moment, it was his father who commanded the stage. And he couldn't have been prouder. One of the reporters pushed forward again. "Mr. Carter, how did it feel when that man disrespected you? Did you feel humiliated?" James's eyes narrowed slightly. Humiliation only comes if you let another man take away your dignity. He couldn't take mine. He never had that power. He only revealed the weakness in himself. The words rippled through the crowd like a wave. Murmurs of approval spread, and more applause followed. The cameras loved it, but it wasn't a performance. Every word came from the heart of a man who had seen the worst of humanity and still chosen grace. A young boy, no older than 10, slipped through the crowd, clutching a small notepad. He tugged nervously at James's sleeve. "Sir," the boy said quietly, "my grandpa was a soldier too. He passed away last year. Can I shake your hand?" James's expression softened instantly. He bent down, his knees creaking, and extended his hand. The boy gripped it with both of his, eyes wide with admiration. "Your grandpa was a hero," James said gently. "Never forget him. Carry his stories with you. That's how you honor him." The boy nodded fiercely, tears brimming in his eyes, before scurrying back to his mother, who mouthed a silent "thank you" to the veteran. As touching as the scene was, Director Carter knew the press frenzy was only beginning. He leaned toward his deputy, who had been standing nearby. "We need to control this before it spirals. My father doesn't deserve to be hounded day and night." Deputy Secretary Miles nodded. "Agreed. But this can also be an opportunity. America needs stories like his right now. Stories that remind people of honor, resilience, and forgiveness." James overheard and gave a dry chuckle. "You make me sound like a sermon. I'm just an old man who wanted a cup of coffee." His son shook his head firmly. "No, Dad. You're more than that. You've always been more." As the press conference wound down, the officers returned with an update. "Director, the suspect has been booked and is in holding. He's already trying to call in favors, but nothing's sticking. We've got multiple eyewitness accounts. The case is solid." The mention of the bully shifted the mood. The crowd muttered, some angry, some curious. One reporter shouted, "Will he be facing jail time?" Director Carter answered this time, "That decision will come through the courts. But let me be clear, no one is above the law. Not even someone who thinks veterans are beneath them." That statement was picked up instantly, cameras flashing again. The words would be played on news channels within the hour, a soundbite that would travel across the country. When the press finally dispersed, the diner returned to something resembling calm. The crowd thinned, the cameras left, and only the faint hum of conversation remained. James and his son slipped back inside, the warmth of the diner replacing the chaos outside. The waitress brought over fresh plates of food, steaming eggs, crispy bacon, pancakes drizzled with syrup. She set them down with trembling hands. "This one's on the house," she said softly. "It's the least we can do." James smiled, patting her hand. "You don't have to do that. I pay my way, always have, always will." But his son interjected gently. "Dad, let her. People want to give back when they see courage. It's not charity, it's gratitude." The old veteran nodded slowly, finally accepting the plate. For a while, father and son ate in silence, the noise of the diner filling the gaps. But there was still something unspoken between them, something heavier than the morning's events. At last, Director Carter set down his fork. "Dad, I need to ask you something. Why didn't you fight back? You could have defended yourself. No one would have blamed you." James looked at him calmly. "Because fighting back would have made me like him. And I refuse to let anger dictate my actions." "Son, when you've lived as long as I have, you learn that the real strength isn't in how hard you can hit. It's in how much you can endure without losing yourself." His son stared at him, humbled. "That's why you've always been my hero." James chuckled lightly. "I thought superheroes wore capes. All I've got is an old jacket." But his son's voice grew softer. "No cape could ever mean as much as those patches on your sleeve." The words hung in the air, heavy with truth. For all the power, authority, and respect Director Carter commanded in his career, none of it compared to the quiet, unshakable dignity of the man who had raised him. Outside, the town was already buzzing with the news. Social media was filling up with videos from the diner, the clip of the slap, and the moment James Carter stepped outside to speak to reporters. Millions were watching, commenting, sharing. Strangers from across the country were calling him a symbol of strength and forgiveness. But inside the diner, none of that mattered. What mattered was a father and son sharing a meal, bound together by blood, love, and a respect that no insult could ever destroy. Yet, as the day went on, both knew this wasn't the end of the story. The bully wasn't just a nameless man. There were always deeper truths hiding in the shadows, and this one was about to come to light. The rest of the day unfolded in ways James Carter never could have imagined. By evening, news outlets across the country had replayed the diner footage countless times. The image of an old black veteran sitting calmly after being struck, refusing to retaliate, had captured the nation's attention. Hashtags with his name trended online. Some called him a hero, others a saint. Messages poured in from veterans groups, schools, and even military leaders. Everyone seemed to agree. The world needed more men like James Carter. But while the world celebrated him, James himself remained unaffected. He returned home quietly, his small house on the edge of town as humble as always. The only sign of the day's chaos was the patrol car that now lingered on his street, a precaution arranged by his son. Inside, James settled into his favorite chair, worn from years of use, and sighed. He didn't crave fame. All he wanted was peace. Director Carter, however, knew peace was far from guaranteed. He spent the evening on the phone, handling the fallout. Yes, he'll press charges, he confirmed to one official. Yes, the case will be handled fairly. No, this isn't about politics. He hung up, rubbing his temples. Then he looked over at his father, who was leafing calmly through an old photo album. You don't seem fazed at all, his son said finally. James chuckled. After surviving the battlefield, you learn not to let one man's foolishness rattle your soul. Besides, anger is easy. Forgiveness takes work. And I've still got work left to do. The younger Carter shook his head, both admiring and baffled by his father's calmness. But before he could respond, his phone buzzed again. He glanced at the screen and frowned. It's about him, he muttered. James looked up. The bully. Yes, his son replied. They've dug into his background. And it turns out he's not just some loudmouth in a diner. He's connected. He's been linked to extremist groups, people who thrive on spreading hate. He's got a record of inciting violence, stirring division. James sighed deeply. So it wasn't random. No, his son said grimly. It was deliberate. He wanted to make a spectacle. He saw you, an elderly black man in uniform, and decided to make you a target. But he didn't expect you to stay calm. He didn't expect me to be there. The truth settled heavily between them. What had seemed like a simple act of cruelty was part of something larger, darker. And now, because of James's composure and his son's authority, the world's eyes were on it. Then maybe, James said softly, this is bigger than us. Maybe it happened so people could see the truth. The following days proved him right. Court proceedings were swift, the evidence undeniable. Witnesses testified, videos played in the courtroom, and the bully's arrogance melted under the weight of justice. He was sentenced not only for assault, but for hate-related offenses tied to his extremist connections. His smirk never returned. But even more powerful than the trial was what happened outside it. Across the country, veterans shared their own stories of disrespect and invisibility. Communities rallied to honor them. Schools invited James Carter to speak to children about dignity and resilience. His words, simple and unpolished, touched hearts everywhere. I'm no hero, he told them. The heroes are the ones who never came home. But if my story makes you pause before you disrespect someone who's given for this country, then maybe it's worth telling. His son stood proudly by him through it all. Though he commanded armies and safeguarded a nation, it was his father who taught him the greatest lesson. Real power doesn't come from authority or titles. It comes from the quiet strength to rise above hatred. One evening, months later, father and son returned to the same diner where it all began. The waitress greeted them with tears in her eyes and a hug that spoke louder than words. The regulars stood, applauding as James walked in. On the wall hung a new framed photo of him in uniform, placed there by the community as a reminder of the day dignity won over cruelty. James shook his head at the attention, but his son leaned in with a smile. Dad, you may not like the spotlight, but you've changed lives. maybe more than you ever did in battle. The old veteran sipped his coffee, the same way he always had, and smiled faintly. Then maybe the war never really ends, son. Maybe we just keep fighting it in different ways. And if the battlefield now is teaching people respect, then I'll do my part. The diner filled with warmth and laughter that night. People shared stories, toasted to the veteran, and left with hearts a little lighter, reminded of the power of kindness and forgiveness. For James Carter, the memory of that slap would fade into the background. But the lesson it sparked, that respect must be chosen, lived, and passed down, would echo for generations. And for his son, the man who carried the weight of national security on his shoulders, there was no doubt. The strongest protector he had ever known wasn't Homeland Security. It was his father. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit the like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories just like this one. Your support helps us keep bringing you stories that inspire and move millions.